The sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoed like a gunshot in the silent boardroom. Xavier didn't just sign the divorce papers. He flourished his signature with an arrogant smirk, tossing the pen across the mahogany table toward his wife, Wyatt. He thought he was finally cutting loose a dead weight to run off with his young mistress. He called Wyatt plain, boring, and a burden on his rising career. But Xavier didn't know that the ink on those papers had sealed his fate in a way he never imagined. Within the hour, a judge would read a last will and testament that would turn Xavier's victory into absolute ruin. He thought he was walking away with his freedom, but he had just signed away a $50 million fortune. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the Thorne and Henderson law firm smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. It was a cold, sterile environment, fitting for the end of a 10-year marriage. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline was gray and weeping with rain. But inside, Xavier Sterling was beaming. He adjusted the cuffs of his Italian suit, a suit Wyatt had saved for 3 months to buy him for his last birthday, and looked across the table with a mixture of pity and disdain. Wyatt sat opposite him. She wore a simple beige cardigan and dark slacks, her hair pulled back in a practical, if slightly messy bun. She looked tired. Her hands were folded in her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't looked at him since they entered the room. "Come on, Elle," Xavier said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy that barely masked his impatience. "Don't drag this out. It's embarrassing. We both know this marriage has been over since I made senior VP. You're just not built for my world anymore." Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had known Wyatt since she was a child, sat at the head of the table. He was a man of few words, with bushy grey eyebrows that currently knit together as he looked at Xavier. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, his voice gravelly, "I must advise you one last time. Once these papers are signed and filed, the dissolution of assets is final. You are waiving your right to any future spousal support or claims on Wyatt's potential future assets. In exchange, you keep the condo in the city and the BMW, and you assume no responsibility for her current financial situation." Xavier let out a sharp, barking laugh. He leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Henderson, look at her. Her financial situation is a pile of medical bills from her late father and a teacher's salary. I'm doing her a favor by taking the condo and the car so she doesn't have to pay the taxes on them. I'm the one with the assets here. I just want to make sure she can't come clawing at my bonuses next year." He turned his gaze to Wyatt. "No offense, Elle, but you know it's true. You've always been a bit of a mouse. I need a lioness. Someone who can stand next to me at galas and not look like the catering staff." Wyatt finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. There was a strange calmness in them that Xavier mistook for defeat. "Is that what Vanessa is? A lioness?" Xavier's smirk faltered for a second, then returned wider than before. "Vanessa understands ambition. She understands me. She's waiting downstairs, actually. We have a flight to Cabo at 4 p.m. to celebrate. So, if you could just sign." He slid the papers aggressively toward her. Wyatt reached out. Her hand didn't tremble. She picked up the cheap plastic pen the firm provided. Xavier had refused to let her use his gold Mont Blanc, and looked at the document. "Are you sure about this, Xavier?" Wyatt asked softly. "You're absolutely sure you want nothing to do with me or my family ever again? You want a clean break?" "Cleaner than a hospital floor," Xavier scoffed. "Sign it, Wyatt. Stop being dramatic. It's over. Go find yourself a nice librarian or a mechanic. Someone on your level." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "Wyatt, you are under no obligation to sign this version. We can contest for the house." "No," Wyatt said, her voice strengthening. "He wants the condo. He wants the car. He wants his freedom. Let him have it." She pressed the pen to the paper. The sound was distinct. Scritch, scratch. She signed her name, Wyatt Vance. She had already dropped Sterling. Xavier snatched the papers the moment she lifted the pen. He quickly scribbled his own signature, pressing down so hard he nearly tore the page. "Done!" Xavier slapped the table. "Finally. God, I feel 10 pounds lighter." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Well, Henderson, file those immediately. I want the divorce decree effective as of today." "The decree will be filed this afternoon," Henderson said, his face impassive. "However, Mr. Sterling, please sit down." Xavier checked his Rolex. "I don't have time for chit-chat." "Like I said, Cabo." "Sit down, Xavier," Wyatt said. It wasn't a request. The tone was different, sharper, colder. It was a tone he had never heard from her in 10 years. Xavier paused, halfway to the door. He turned around, confused. "Excuse me?" "The meeting isn't over," Mr. Henderson stated, opening a leather-bound folder that had been sitting to his right, untouched until now. "We have concluded the matter of Sterling versus Sterling. We must now move to the second item on the agenda." "I don't have any other business with you people," Xavier sneered. "You do," Henderson corrected. "You were listed as a mandatory attendee for the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Vance, Wyatt's father." Xavier rolled his eyes so hard it looked painful. "Oh, for God's sake! The old man died 3 weeks ago. What did he leave? His collection of rusty fishing lures? The medical debt from his cancer treatments? I'm not paying his bills, Henderson. I just divorced his daughter. I'm out." "Mr. Vance's debts have all been settled," Henderson said smoothly. "And he did not leave fishing lures. He left instructions. And since you were Wyatt's husband at the time of his death, you are named in the preamble. You must be present for the reading to validate the timeline." "Fine," Xavier huffed, throwing himself back into the chair. He pulled out his phone and texted Vanessa. "Running 10 mins late. The mouse is making a scene. Order champagne." "Read the old man's letter. Let's get this over with." Wyatt sat perfectly still. She wasn't looking at Xavier anymore. She was looking at the leather folder with a mixture of grief and steel. She knew what was inside. Xavier, in his arrogance, had never bothered to ask who Arthur Vance really was. He just saw a man in flannel shirts who lived in a cabin. He never asked about the years before the cabin. He never asked about the patents. "I will begin," Henderson said, putting on a pair of reading glasses. He broke the wax seal on the heavy, cream-colored envelope. "I, Arthur James Vance, being of sound mind and body," Henderson began. Xavier tapped his foot impatiently. He was already mentally in Cabo, visualizing Vanessa in that red bikini. He had no idea that the man he had called a useless old redneck was about to destroy his life from beyond the grave. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Xavier had just made, one has to understand the last 10 years. Xavier met Wyatt in college. She was on a scholarship, studying literature. He was a business major, already obsessed with appearances. He dated her because she was pretty in a quiet way, but mostly because she was supportive. She did his laundry. She proofread his essays. She cooked dinner while he studied. She was the perfect starter wife. When they graduated, Xavier landed a junior analyst role at a mid-tier firm. He was aggressive, charming, and ruthless, traits that served him well. Wyatt became a high school English teacher. For years, Xavier climbed the ladder. As his paycheck grew, so did his ego. He started buying bespoke suits. He leased luxury cars. He began attending high society mixers, where he would introduce Wyatt as just a teacher, often cutting her off mid-sentence to talk to someone more important. He never paid much attention to Wyatt's family. He knew her mother had died when she was young. He knew her father, Arthur, lived in a secluded cabin in Montana. Once a year, they would visit. Xavier hated it. He hated the lack of cell service. He hated the smell of pine and wood smoke. And he especially hated Arthur. Arthur was a man of few words who wore worn-out flannel and drove a beat-up 85 Ford truck. To Xavier, Arthur was a failure, a nobody. "How can you stand him?" Xavier had complained 3 years ago during their last Christmas visit. "He just sits on the porch whittling wood. He has no ambition, Wyatt. It's sad. No wonder you have no drive. It's genetic." Wyatt had just smiled tightly and said, "He's happy, Xavier. He has peace. That's worth more than a corner office." "Peace doesn't buy a penthouse," Xavier had retorted. That was the beginning of the end. 6 months ago, Xavier met Vanessa. She was the new marketing director at his firm. 26 years old, blonde, ambitious, and morally flexible. She fed Xavier's ego in a way Wyatt never did. She told him he was a king, a conqueror. She looked at his Rolex with hunger, not indifference. The affair started quickly. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences in Miami. Xavier didn't even try very hard to hide it. He wanted to be caught. He wanted an excuse to leave. When Arthur fell ill with pancreatic cancer, Wyatt took a leave of absence to care for him. Xavier stayed in the city, complaining that her absence was inconvenient for his schedule. He never visited the hospital. He never sent flowers. When Arthur died, Xavier didn't attend the funeral. He claimed he had a crucial merger meeting. In reality, he was shopping for engagement rings with Vanessa. That was the breaking point. Wyatt returned from the funeral, packed a single suitcase, and moved into the guest room. 2 days later, Xavier slapped the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. "I'm doing this for us," he had said, gaslighting her to the very end. "We've grown apart. I'm soaring and you're grounded." Now, sitting in the law office, Xavier checked his watch again. 5 minutes had passed. "Item 1, real estate," Henderson read. Xavier yawned. "Here we go. Who gets the cabin? If it's me, I'm selling it for firewood." Henderson ignored him. "To my beloved daughter Wyatt, I leave my primary residence in Montana, comprising of the cabin and the surrounding 3,000 acres of timberland." Xavier paused. 3,000 acres. That was a lot of lands. Even in the middle of nowhere, timberland had value. Maybe a few million? A pang of annoyance hit him. He had just signed away rights to her assets. Well, whatever. A few million wasn't worth staying married to a bore. "Item 2, liquid assets," Henderson continued. "Wait," Xavier interrupted. "Liquid assets? The guy couldn't afford a new truck." "Please hold your questions until the end," Henderson snapped. He turned the page. "To my daughter Wyatt, I leave the contents of my primary investment portfolio." Henderson paused for effect, looking over his spectacles at Xavier. "This portfolio is held in a blind trust managed by Vanguard. The total value as of this morning's market opening is $42,500,000. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner and the sudden, ragged intake of breath from Xavier. He froze, his brain short-circuited. 42 million? He whispered. "That's impossible. He was a lumberjack. He was a nobody." "Mr. Vance," Henderson said icily, "was the primary patent holder for the hydrofiltration system used by almost every municipal water plant in North America. He invented it in the 80s. He sold the manufacturing rights but kept the royalties. He chose to live a simple life because he despised people who were obsessed with wealth." Xavier felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Wyatt. She hadn't moved. She was staring at her hands, a single tear rolling down her cheek, not for the money, but for the memory of her father. "You knew," Xavier choked out. "Wyatt, you knew?" "I knew he was comfortable," Wyatt said quietly. "I didn't know the amount. He never talked about money. He said money makes people do ugly things." She looked up at Xavier, her eyes hard. "He was right. But we're married," Xavier stammered, his mind racing. "We are married. That's marital property, the royalties. That accrued during our marriage. That's community property." He stood up, panic setting in. "Henderson, the divorce. It's not filed yet. You said it would be filed this afternoon." Henderson smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, there is a specific clause in the will regarding your marriage. I haven't read that part yet." "Read it," Xavier commanded, his voice shrill. "Read it now." Henderson looked down at the document. Item 3. The contingency clause. The lawyer took a sip of water. Xavier was sweating now. His shirt collar felt like a noose. Vanessa texted him again. "Where are you? I'm opening the Cristal." Xavier ignored it. "My daughter Wyatt has a heart of gold," Henderson read Arthur's words. "She sees the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. I have watched her husband, Xavier Sterling, for 10 years. I have seen how he treats her. I have seen his greed and his vanity." Xavier gripped the edge of the table. The old man was insulting him from the grave. "Therefore," the will continued, "the inheritance of the aforementioned $42 million and the real estate is subject to a strict condition regarding her marital status." Xavier held his breath. "If, at the time of the reading of this will, my daughter is still happily married to Xavier Sterling, 50% of the estate shall be placed in a trust for their future children, and the other 50% to Wyatt directly." Xavier's eyes widened. "See? Married. We are technically—" "Let me finish," Henderson barked. "However," Henderson read, his voice dropping an octave, "if Xavier Sterling has filed for divorce, or coerced Wyatt into filing for divorce, or if he has been proven to be unfaithful, then he is to receive absolutely nothing. Furthermore," Henderson looked directly at Xavier, "if Xavier Sterling has signed any legal separation or divorce agreement prior to this reading, waiving his rights to Wyatt's assets in an attempt to discard her, then that document shall serve as irrefutable proof of his intent. By his own signature, he forfeits any claim to the Vance estate." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Xavier looked at the divorce papers sitting on the corner of the table. The ink was dry. His signature, arrogant, large, flourishing, stared back at him. He had signed it 10 minutes ago. He had mocked her while doing it. "No," Xavier whispered. "No, you can't do this. I rescind it. I rescind my signature." He lunged for the papers. Mr. Henderson was faster. He placed a heavy hand over the document. "These are legal documents, witnessed by a notary and an officer of the court. You cannot simply rescind them because you found out you lost the lottery, Mr. Sterling." "It's fraud!" Xavier screamed, his face turning purple. "She trapped me. She knew. She let me sign it." "You prepared the papers, Xavier," Wyatt said, her voice cutting through his hysteria. "You hired the lawyer. You set the terms. You insisted on the clean break. You wanted to keep your bonus. You wanted the BMW. You got exactly what you asked for." Xavier fell back into his chair, looking like a man who had been shot. The realization was crashing down on him. The $40 million, the timberland. It was all gone, and he had given it away to keep a used BMW and a 2-bedroom condo. But the drama was far from over, because Arthur Vance wasn't just rich. He was vindictive against those who hurt his daughter. "There is one final addendum," Henderson said, turning the last page, "regarding the debts." Xavier looked up, dazed. "Debts? You said he had no debts." "I said his medical debts were settled," Henderson corrected. "But Mr. Vance purchased something quite substantial 3 days before he died. A promissory note." Henderson pulled out a photocopy of a bank document. "It seems, Mr. Sterling, that your company, Stratton Finance, was looking for a private angel investor to cover a massive loss in your Asian markets last quarter, a loss that you were personally responsible for managing." Xavier went cold. That was a secret. If the board found out about the Asian market loss, he would be fired. He had been trying to cover it up until the next quarter. "Mr. Vance bought the debt," Henderson said with a small, terrifying smile. "Wyatt now owns the debt your department owes, which means, essentially, Wyatt is now your boss's biggest creditor." Xavier looked at Wyatt. The mouse, the boring teacher. She stood up slowly, smoothing down her cardigan. She didn't look like a mouse anymore. She looked like the owner of a $50 million empire. "I think," Wyatt said softly, "we need to have a talk about your employment status, Xavier. But first, you should probably answer Vanessa. She's been texting you a lot." The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor was the longest 30 seconds of Xavier Sterling's life. Wyatt stood in the corner, clutching the leather folder containing her father's will to her chest. She stared straight ahead at the brushed steel doors, her expression unreadable. Xavier, conversely, was vibrating with a chaotic energy that hovered somewhere between rage and nausea. "Wyatt," he hissed, keeping his voice low so the other 2 people in the elevator, a courier and a paralegal, wouldn't hear. "We need to fix this. Now." Wyatt didn't blink. "There is nothing to fix, Xavier. You wanted a clean break. You signed the papers." "I signed them under false pretenses," Xavier argued, sweat beading on his forehead. "You withheld information. That's entrapment." "I withheld nothing," Wyatt replied calmly, finally turning to look at him. Her eyes, usually soft and yielding, were now as cold as the Montana winter. "You never asked. In 10 years, you never once asked about my father's life before the cabin. You never asked about his work. You were too busy talking about yourself." The elevator dinged. The doors opened into the opulent marble lobby of the Thorne and Henderson building. "I'm calling my lawyer," Xavier threatened, following her out. "I'll contest the will. I'll contest the divorce. You won't see a dime of that money until I've dragged you through court for a decade." Wyatt stopped abruptly near the revolving doors. She turned to him, and for the first time, Xavier saw the lioness he claimed he wanted. But she wasn't roaring for him. She was roaring at him. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady. "Mr. Henderson is one of the best estate attorneys in the state. And regarding the divorce, you were the one who insisted on the expedited, uncontested filing to get to Cabo with Vanessa. You created the trap, Xavier. I just let you walk into it." She stepped through the revolving doors and into the rainy Chicago afternoon. A sleek black town car was waiting at the curb, a courtesy from the law firm for their high-net-worth client. A driver in a cap held the door open. Xavier watched, mouth agape, as his boring wife stepped into the luxury vehicle without looking back. "Xavier!" The shrill voice snapped him back to reality. He turned to see Vanessa sitting on a velvet bench in the lobby, looking annoyed. She was scrolling through her phone, her Louis Vuitton luggage stacked beside her. She wore a tight red dress that was inappropriate for a Tuesday afternoon, but perfect for the attention she craved. "You've been up there for an hour," Vanessa complained, standing up. I've already ordered the Uber Black. We're going to be late for the lounge. I need a mimosa." Xavier looked at her. Really looked at her. 10 minutes ago, she was the prize. She was the trophy he had won. Now, staring at her heavily lined eyes and the pouty expression that used to turn him on, he felt a wave of revulsion. She was the reason he had just lost $42 million. But he couldn't tell her. Not yet. Panic seized his chest. If Vanessa knew he was effectively broke, that he had lost the potential fortune, she would leave him before they even reached O'Hare. And right now, Xavier couldn't handle being alone. He needed a win. He needed to pretend, just for a weekend, that he was still the king of the world. He would figure out how to sue Wyatt on Monday. "Sorry, baby," Xavier forced a smile, though it looked more like a grimace. It dragged on. Wyatt was being emotional. You know how she is. Vanessa rolled her eyes, grabbing her purse. God, she's pathetic. Did she cry? "Yeah," Xavier lied. "She cried, begged me to stay, but I signed. It's done. I'm all yours." Vanessa smirked, hooking her arm through his. "Good. Let's go. I want to be on the beach by sunset." The ride to O'Hare International Airport was tense. Xavier sat in the back of the Uber, staring out the window at the grey highway. His mind was racing. 42 million. The number kept flashing in his mind like a neon sign. He thought about the debt he owed at work. Wyatt owned that debt now. "Xavier, are you listening to me?" Vanessa poked his arm. "What?" "Yes. Sorry." "I said, I want to upgrade to first class," Vanessa said, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. "Business is fine, but the leg room in first is better, and I want the champagne service before takeoff." Xavier's stomach dropped. He usually put everything on his corporate Amex, but if Wyatt really owned the debt... No, that wouldn't affect his credit cards yet. But the divorce papers. He had agreed to take on his own debts immediately. "Let's just stick to the seats we have," Xavier muttered. "It's a short flight." "Don't be cheap," Vanessa scoffed. "You just dumped the dead weight. Celebrate." They arrived at the terminal. Xavier dragged the luggage, his head pounding. At the check-in counter, the agent smiled brightly. "Checking in for Cabo? Mr. Sterling and Ms. Hart?" "Yes," Vanessa cut in. "And we'd like to upgrade to first class. Put it on his card." She pointed a manicured finger at Xavier. Xavier reluctantly pulled out his sleek, black, platinum card. He handed it to the agent, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's fine," he told himself. The agent swiped the card. She frowned. She typed something and swiped it again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," the agent said, her voice dropping to a polite whisper. "This card has been declined." "That's impossible," Xavier snapped, his voice too loud. "There's no limit on that card. Try it again." "I have tried twice, sir. The code is account frozen. Owner request." Xavier froze. He remembered the clause in the divorce settlement he had drafted himself. He had put that in there to stop Wyatt from going on a revenge shopping spree. But because the platinum card was technically under the household account, an account he had opened years ago with Wyatt, it was frozen too. "Do you have another card?" the agent asked. Xavier patted his pockets. His personal debit card? That account had maybe $4,000 in it. Enough for the flight, but not the lavish weekend Vanessa expected. "Here," Xavier mumbled, handing over the debit card. "Use this." "Upgrade?" the agent asked. "No," Xavier said quickly. Just the tickets." He felt Vanessa's gaze burning a hole in the side of his head. He didn't dare look at her until they were walking away from the counter. "Declined?" Vanessa asked, her voice sharp. "Xavier, why was your card declined?" "It's just a banking error," Xavier lied, sweating profusely. Because of the divorce filing. The lawyers freeze things temporarily. It'll be cleared up by Monday. So we're flying coach? Vanessa stopped walking. In the middle of the busy concourse, people bumped into them, grumbling. It's just for 3 hours, Van. Come on. And what about the hotel? The villa? Vanessa crossed her arms. Did you pay for that in advance? Xavier went pale. He hadn't. He was planning to pay upon arrival. I can fix it, Xavier stammered. I'll call the bank. You better, Vanessa hissed. Because I didn't leave my apartment for a budget vacation, Xavier. I date winners. Winners don't get their cards declined. She turned and marched towards security. Xavier watched her go, a sinking feeling in his gut. He realized then that he wasn't looking at a lover. He was looking at a transaction, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have the currency to pay for it. The weekend was a disaster. They didn't go to Cabo. After 3 hours on the phone with the bank, while sitting on his suitcase in the terminal, Xavier couldn't get the freeze lifted without Wyatt's countersignature. He had to tell Vanessa the truth, or at least a version of it. He told her the assets were tied up for a week. Vanessa didn't take it well. She threw a Starbucks latte at his feet, told him to call her when he was liquid again, and took an Uber back to the city alone. Xavier spent the weekend in the condo he had fought so hard to keep. It was empty. Wyatt had moved her things out weeks ago, but now the absence of her presence felt different. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a vacuum. He drank expensive scotch and paced the floor, alternating between rage at Wyatt and terror about his job. He walked into the Stratton Finance skyscraper at 8:00 a.m. The usual hum of the office felt off. The receptionist didn't smile at him. Junior analysts stopped talking when he walked by. Mr. Sterling, his assistant, Jessica, said as he approached his desk. She didn't stand up. Mr. Gentry wants to see you in the boardroom. Immediately. Gentry? Xavier frowned. The CEO rarely handled Monday morning meetings personally. Is it about the Asian accounts? He didn't say, but the whole executive board is there. Xavier felt a cold sweat prickle his back. They know. They must know about the losses. He grabbed his tablet, rehearsing his excuses. He walked to the double-glass doors of the boardroom. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and pushed them open. The room was full. The CFO, the COO, the head of legal, and CEO David Gentry were all seated around the oval table. And at the far end of the table, in the seat usually reserved for the chairman, sat Wyatt. Xavier stopped dead in his tracks. Wyatt? She looked different. Gone was the beige cardigan. She was wearing a tailored navy blazer that screamed power, with a silk blouse underneath. Her hair was blown out, shiny and sleek. She wasn't wearing much makeup, but she looked radiant, dangerous. Sit down, Xavier, David Gentry said. His voice was grim. Gentry was a bulldog of a man, usually loud and jovial, but today he looked like he was sitting on a tack. What is she doing here? Xavier demanded, pointing a trembling finger at his ex-wife. This is a closed board meeting, David. She has no clearance. Actually, Wyatt spoke up. Her voice was calm, projecting effortlessly across the room. I have the highest clearance in the room, Xavier. Please take a seat. We're discussing your performance. My performance? Xavier laughed nervously, looking around the room for support. No one met his eyes. Wyatt, you're a high school English teacher. You don't know the first thing about finance. David, get security to escort her out. Mr. Sterling, the head of legal, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, interjected. As of Friday afternoon, Ms. Vance, formerly Mrs. Sterling, acquired the entirety of the distressed debt bundle related to our Southeast Asian expansion. She is currently Stratton Finance's largest single creditor. Xavier felt his knees give out. He slumped into the nearest chair. The debt. Your dad bought the debt? He did, Wyatt said. He thought it was a wise investment. He knew the company was solid, even if the manager in charge of that division was reckless. She opened a file in front of her. It wasn't the will this time. It was a spreadsheet. His spreadsheet. I've spent the weekend reviewing the numbers with a forensic accountant, Wyatt said. It seems, Xavier, that the losses in the Asian market weren't due to regulatory shifts, as you claimed in your last quarterly report. They were due to unauthorized speculative trading. You were gambling with company money to try and double your bonus. The room went deathly silent. This was the kill shot. Gambling with client funds was not just a fireable offense. It was criminal. That's a matter of interpretation, Xavier choked out. I was hedging aggressively. You were gambling, Wyatt corrected, and you lost $12 million. Then you tried to hide it by shifting debt into a shell holding company, the very debt my father purchased. She looked at David Gentry. David, as the primary holder of this note, I have the right to call in the debt immediately if I feel the management poses a risk to my investment. And frankly, keeping Xavier Sterling employed here is a massive risk. Gentry nodded, looking defeated. He turned to Xavier. Xavier, under the circumstances, and considering the evidence Miss Vance has provided, we have no choice. You're firing me? Xavier whispered. I built this division. We are terminating you for cause, effective immediately, Gentry said. Security is waiting outside to escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. Your company phone and laptop stay here. You can't do this. Xavier stood up, his face red. Wyatt, this is vindictive. You're doing this because I left you. Wyatt stood up too. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a mixture of pity and finality. I'm not doing this because you left me, Xavier. I'm doing this because you're a liability. You sign papers without reading them. You gamble with money that isn't yours, and you treat people like stepping stones. She closed the file. You wanted to be a lion, Xavier. Lions survive in the wild. Let's see how you do. Wyatt turned to the CEO. Thank you, David. I expect the repayment plan on my desk by Wednesday. Good day. She walked past Xavier without stopping. He smelled her perfume, something new, something expensive, like jasmine and rain. 2 security guards stepped into the room. Mr. Sterling, one of them said, placing a hand on his shoulder. This way, sir. Xavier was marched through the office. The bullpen was silent. Hundreds of eyes watched him. He saw Vanessa standing near the copy room. She wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was holding her phone, recording him being escorted out. She was already distancing herself, turning his downfall into content for her social media. They led him to the elevator, the same elevator he had ridden down with Wyatt just days before. They didn't even let him pack his box. They handed him his coat and shoved him out into the lobby. He stood on the sidewalk, the bustle of Chicago moving around him. It was raining again. He had no job. He had no wife. He had no fortune. And as he reached for his phone to call a cab, he remembered he didn't have a car coming either. He was grounded, and Wyatt was soaring, but Xavier wasn't the type to just give up. As the rain soaked his expensive suit, a dark thought began to form in his mind. He knew things about the company. He knew things about Wyatt. If he couldn't have the money, he would make sure she suffered for taking it. He hailed a taxi. "Take me to the 5th District Precinct," he told the driver. If he was going down, he was going to try and drag everyone else with him. He was going to accuse Arthur Vance of insider trading. The fluorescent lights of the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, regional office in Chicago, hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. It was a stark contrast to the warm wood paneling of Xavier's former office, or even the sterile luxury of the law firm. Here, everything was grey, bureaucratic, and intimidating. Xavier sat in a metal chair, his hands shaking slightly. He had been waiting for 2 hours. His suit was still damp from the rain, and he hadn't eaten since the morning, but the hunger in his stomach was nothing compared to the hunger for revenge burning in his chest. Across the table sat Special Agent Reynolds, a man with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that had seen every white-collar scam in the last 30 years. Next to him was a younger agent, Agent Klein, who was furiously typing on a laptop. "Let me get this straight, Mr. Sterling," Agent Reynolds said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "You are voluntarily reporting a violation of the Insider Trading Sanctions Act, a violation that involves your former employer, Stratton Finance, and your ex-wife?" "Yes," Xavier said, his voice raspy but firm. "And her deceased father, Arthur Vance. It was a conspiracy." Xavier had spent the cab ride formulating the lie. It had to be believable. It had to be close enough to the truth to stick. "Explain," Reynolds said. "My ex-wife, Wyatt Vance, had access to my home office," Xavier began, weaving his web. "She knew my passwords. She knew I was working on the Southeast Asian restructure. I believe she stole confidential, non-public information regarding the distress of that division, and passed it to her father, Arthur Vance." Xavier leaned in, his eyes wide with feigned sincerity. Arthur Vance was a recluse, a man with no financial background. Suddenly, 3 days before he dies, he buys $10 million worth of specific, distressed debt? How? How would a lumberjack know to do that unless he had inside information? They used my work to bet against me, to buy leverage, and then used that leverage to fire me today. Agent Klein stopped typing and looked up. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Sterling. It implies corporate espionage and securities fraud." "It fits, doesn't it?" Xavier pressed. "Look at the timing. I file for divorce, and suddenly she owns my debt? It was a setup. They planned to destroy my career and take my assets. I'm the victim here." Reynolds remained silent for a long moment, studying Xavier. "If what you say is true, the purchase of that debt is invalid. The assets would be frozen pending a federal investigation. Wyatt Vance could face prison time. But," Reynolds paused, "if you are lying to a federal agent, Mr. Sterling, to settle a domestic dispute, you will be the one in handcuffs." "I have nothing left to lose," Xavier said, and that part, at least, was true. "Investigate it. Freeze her accounts. Check her father's phone records. You'll see." Reynolds nodded slowly. "We'll open a file. But until we verify your claims, you are a material witness. Do not leave the city." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By Tuesday morning, the news had leaked. Xavier had tipped off a reporter at the Chicago Tribune, an old drinking buddy, ensuring the story ran front page. Wyatt was at the cabin in Montana when the news broke. She had flown there immediately after firing Xavier, needing to be close to her father's memory. She was in the dusty workshop, surrounded by the smell of cedar shavings and old oil, when her phone exploded with notifications. First, it was Mr. Henderson. "Wyatt," the lawyer's voice was urgent. "The SEC has frozen the Vanguard Trust. They've frozen the estate. Xavier has filed a formal complaint, accusing you and Arthur of stealing corporate secrets." Wyatt sank onto a wooden stool, clutching the phone. "He's insane. Arthur didn't steal anything. He barely knew how to use a smartphone." "It doesn't matter what the truth is right now," Henderson warned. "It matters what it looks like. And to an outsider, A recluse buying complex derivatives just before a crash looks suspicious. Xavier knows the system, Wyatt. He knows how to jam the gears. He's bought himself time, and he's trying to bankrupt you with legal fees before you can access the inheritance. Wyatt looked around the workshop. Her eyes landed on a row of old, leather-bound notebooks on a high shelf. Her father's journals. Arthur wrote in them every day. Observations about the weather, the timber, the birds. "Let him investigate," Wyatt said, her voice hardening. "Xavier thinks he knows who my father was. He's about to find out he was wrong. Wyatt, you need to come back to Chicago. You need to be deposed." "I'll be there," she said, "and I'm bringing evidence." Back in Chicago, Xavier was riding a temporary high. With the investigation open, Stratton Finance had to pause the termination proceedings, pending the outcome. Technically, he was on unpaid administrative leave, but he wasn't fired yet. He still had his company ID. He sat in the condo, which was now filled with empty takeout boxes. He felt like a genius. He had checkmated her. She couldn't touch the money. She would be tied up in court for years. Eventually, she would beg him to drop the accusation in exchange for a settlement. He would get his 10 million, maybe 20. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. Xavier's heart leaped. "Hey, babe," Xavier answered, trying to sound smooth. "Missing me?" "I'm missing my earrings." Vanessa's voice was ice cold. "I left my diamond studs on your nightstand last week. I'm coming by to get them." "Oh," Xavier deflated. "Yeah, they're here. Come over. We can talk. I've got a plan, Van. I've got Wyatt on the ropes." "I don't care about your plan, Xavier," Vanessa snapped. "I saw the news. You're a whistleblower now. You're a rat. No firm in the city will hire a guy who calls the SEC on his own family. You're radioactive." "I did it for the money. For us." "There is no us. I'm dating the VP of marketing at JP Morgan now. He has a boat, a paid-for boat." The line went dead. Xavier threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. "Fine," he screamed at the empty apartment. "I don't need you. I don't need anyone." He needed a drink. He went to the liquor cabinet, but it was empty. He grabbed his coat and stormed out. He would go to his favorite bar, the Gilded Lily. They knew him there. They would treat him with respect. But when he walked into the bar, the atmosphere shifted. It was a place frequented by traders and finance guys. As Xavier walked to the bar, conversation died down. People whispered. "That's him," someone muttered. "The guy who tanked the Asian division and blamed his dead father-in-law." "Snitch," someone else coughed. The bartender, a man Xavier had tipped generously for years, placed a coaster down without making eye contact. "I can't serve you, Mr. Sterling." "What?" Xavier laughed, incredulous. "I've spent thousands here. Pour me a scotch." "Boss's orders," the bartender said. "Mr. Gentry called. Stratton Finance has a corporate account here. He said if we serve you, they pull their business. That's 50 grand a year, Xavier. You're buying your own drinks tonight. Somewhere else." Xavier stared at him, his face burning with humiliation. He turned around and walked out, the laughter of his former peers echoing in his ears. He was a pariah. He stood in the rain, the neon lights of the city reflecting in the puddles. The anger in his gut crystallized into something darker. Hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. If he couldn't have his life back, he would ensure Wyatt burned. He would make sure the SEC investigation found something, anything, to pin on her. He would plant evidence if he had to. He hailed a cab. "Take me to the office," he told the driver. "Stratton Finance." He still had his key card. It might not work for the elevators, but he knew the security guard on the night shift, old Jerry. Jerry was easily bribed. Xavier needed to get into his old computer. He needed to fabricate a digital trail linking Wyatt to his account. It was a desperate, criminal move. But Xavier was past the point of return. The deposition was scheduled for Thursday morning at the SEC regional office. It was a closed-door session, high stakes. Wyatt walked in, flanked by Mr. Henderson and a man Xavier didn't recognize, a tall, severe-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and a forensic accounting certification pin on his lapel. This was Mr. Silas Thorne, no relation to the law firm, but a specialist in recovering hidden assets. Xavier sat on the other side of the table with a court-appointed lawyer, having burned through his retainer with his previous counsel. He looked haggard. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He had failed to get into the office. His keycard had been deactivated, and old Jerry had been replaced by a new security team. His plan to plant evidence had failed. Now, he had to rely on his ability to lie. "We are on the record," Agent Reynolds said, starting the recording device. "Case number 4492B. Investigation into allegations of insider trading regarding the estate of Arthur Vance." Reynolds looked at Wyatt. "Ms. Vance, your ex-husband alleges that you used his passwords to access Stratton Finance servers, obtained non-public data, and instructed your father to purchase debt based on that data. How do you plead to these accusations?" "They are false," Wyatt said calmly. She placed a heavy, canvas tote bag on the table. "Mr. Sterling," Reynolds turned to Xavier, "you stated that Arthur Vance had no financial background, that he was a simple lumberjack, incapable of understanding complex derivatives." "That's right," Xavier sneered, looking at Wyatt. The guy read fishing magazines. He didn't know what a derivative was. Wyatt fed him the info. Wyatt reached into the tote bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, stained with coffee and oil. "Agent Reynolds," Wyatt said, "my father was indeed a simple man in his habits, but he was a mathematician by training. Before he retired to Montana, he worked for the NSA as a cryptanalyst in the late 70s. He didn't talk about it because he signed non-disclosure agreements." Xavier's jaw dropped. "Bullshit." "It is a matter of public record if you have the clearance to look," Wyatt continued. "But more importantly, my father had a hobby. He liked to find patterns. He didn't trust banks, but he tracked them." She opened the journal to a page dated 6 months prior. "Please read this entry," Wyatt said, sliding the book to Agent Reynolds. Reynolds put on his glasses. The room went silent. Xavier turned a sickly shade of grey. That proves nothing," Xavier stammered. "He wrote that down. That's hearsay." "There is more," Wyatt said. She pulled out a USB drive. "My father was paranoid. He had a security system at the cabin, audio and video, high definition. He recorded the porch. He recorded you, Xavier." Mr. Henderson plugged the USB drive into the room's projector. A video appeared on the wall. It was Xavier, pacing on the wooden deck of the cabin, holding a Scotch glass. The audio was crystal clear. "Listen to me. Gentry doesn't know," Video Xavier was saying into his phone. "I'm cooking the books on the Asian deal. By the time they figure it out, I'll have moved the bonus into the Cayman account. Just book the flight to Cabo, Vanessa. We're going to be rich." The video cut out. Agent Reynolds slowly turned his gaze from the screen to Xavier. The look was no longer inquisitive. It was predatory. "Mr. Sterling," Reynolds said, his voice dangerously low. "You just admitted on tape to securities fraud, embezzlement and falsifying corporate records, and you filed a false report with the SEC to cover it up." "No," Xavier whispered. That was out of context." "And regarding the debt purchase," Wyatt interjected. "My father didn't buy the debt because of insider info. He bought it because he heard you admit you were destroying the value of it. He knew the company was strong, but the division was weak because of you. He bought the debt cheap because he knew once you were fired, the value would rebound. It was a brilliant value play based on the incompetence of the manager. You. Wyatt leaned forward. He didn't bet on insider info, Xavier. He bet against your ego, and he won. Agent Reynolds tapped the table. Agent Klein, arrest Mr. Sterling. What? Xavier scrambled up, knocking his chair over. You can't arrest me. I'm the whistleblower. You're the perpetrator, Mr. Sterling, Reynolds said, standing up. You just handed us the evidence of your own crimes. We were looking for insider trading by Arthur Vance. Instead, we found embezzlement by Xavier Sterling. Agent Klein moved efficiently, spinning Xavier around and slamming him against the wall. The handcuffs clicked, a cold, metallic sound that signaled the end of Xavier's life as he knew it. Wyatt, Xavier screamed as he was dragged toward the door. Wyatt, tell them, help me! We were married. You can't let them do this. Wyatt didn't look away. She watched him with a detached sadness. We're divorced, Xavier, she said softly. And as you said, I'm just a boring teacher. I don't get involved in business matters. The door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. 6 months later, the snow was falling softly on the streets of Chicago, dusting the city in white. Wyatt sat in a private booth at a quiet, upscale coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Across from her sat Mr. Henderson. The sentencing hearing concluded this morning, Henderson said, sliding a document across the table. Wyatt didn't touch it immediately. How long? 12 years, Henderson replied. Federal prison, for securities fraud, embezzlement, and filing false federal reports. The judge, Judge Thorne, was particularly harsh because of the attempt to frame a deceased man. Xavier won't be eligible for parole for at least 8. Wyatt nodded slowly. She felt no joy, only relief. The storm was finally over. And the assets? She asked. The condo has been seized to pay restitution to Stratton Finance. The BMW was repossessed. His personal accounts were drained to pay his legal fees. He went into prison with 0 assets to his name. Henderson took a sip of his tea. However, there is a bit of irony. Because you owned the debt he embezzled against, a portion of the restitution the court ordered him to pay actually goes to you. Wyatt managed a small smile. Donate it, all of it, to the literacy program at the high school where I used to teach. A wise choice, Henderson smiled. And speaking of choices, the estate is fully settled. The freeze has been lifted. The timberland, the royalties, the portfolio. It is all yours, Wyatt. $42 million, free and clear. Wyatt looked out the window. She saw a young couple walking down the street, holding hands, laughing. She remembered when she and Xavier were like that, before the ambition, before the greed. I'm selling the timberland, Wyatt said suddenly. Henderson raised an eyebrow. Oh, it's a prime asset. I know, but I'm not selling it to developers. I'm selling it to the state of Montana as a protected nature reserve. It will be named the Arthur Vance Wilderness. No logging, no condos, just trees. Your father would have liked that, Henderson said softly. And the patents, Wyatt continued. I'm lowering the licensing fees for municipal water plants in developing countries. Clean water shouldn't be a luxury. You're going to give away a lot of money, Wyatt. I have enough, she said. I have my salary. I'm going back to teaching next fall. I miss the kids. I miss talking about the Great Gatsby and warning them about people like Tom Buchanan. She stood up, buttoning her coat. She looked at her reflection in the window. She wasn't the tired, mousy woman who had walked into the law firm 6 months ago. She was stronger. She had walked through the fire and come out refined, like gold. "One last thing," Wyatt said. Did Xavier ask about me? At the end?" Henderson sighed. "He asked if you would pay for his commissary account. He said he needed money for snacks and phone calls." Wyatt laughed. It was a genuine, light sound. "Of course he did." She reached into her purse and pulled out a $1 bill. She placed it on the table. "Send him this," Wyatt said. "Tell him it's for a pen, so he can write his memoirs. I hear tragic comedies are very popular these days." She walked out of the coffee shop and into the snowy afternoon. The air was crisp and clean. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold, fresh air. She was free. She was wealthy, not just in money, but in spirit. And as she walked down the street, disappearing into the crowd, Wyatt Vance finally felt like the lioness her father always knew she was. And that, my friends, is the story of how arrogance became the architect of its own destruction. Xavier Sterling thought he was signing away a burden, but he was really signing his own warrant. He underestimated the quiet strength of his wife and the hidden brilliance of a father who watched from the shadows. It serves as a powerful reminder. Never mistake silence for weakness, and never, ever sign a paper without reading the fine print, especially when karma is holding the pen. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching.